Grace for our work, and thank you to Google for hosting us. It's always a pleasure to collaborate on the launch of Freedom on the Net. I would like to give special recognition to the funders of this report, the State Department's Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor, Google, the Slosh Family Foundation, the Dutch Foreign Ministry, Facebook, the Internet Society, Yahoo, and Twitter. Your support again for the We have an excellent panel here to dig into some of the findings of this report, and it's all online. I think for those who have the overview essay, this is just the summary. There are about 900 pages going into over 1,000 pages, in-depth analysis on 65 countries, a lot there, but wanted through some discussion to draw out some of the key findings. Let me introduce our panelists, starting at my right. Sally Shipman-Wentworth is the Vice President of Global Policy at the Internet Society, and she previously served as Assistant Director for Telecommunications and Information Policy in the Office of Science and Technology Policy at the White House. I'm pleased to introduce Daria Luganskaya, who is a journalist based in Moscow, who covers technology and media issues for several outlets, including the BBC and Forbes. Gbenga Sesan is Executive Director of Paradigm Initiative Nigeria, a leading voice on internet freedom issues in his country, and I think expert in issues more broadly in Africa. He was named the Schwab Foundation Social Entrepreneur of 2014, and also listed by CNN as one of 10 leading African tech voices on Twitter. And then Sonia Kelly is Director of Freedom on the Net, and she and our excellent team and network of 70+ analysts and advisors around the world bring together this report. Sonia, let me start with you. What are the key findings this year?
Well, thank you, Daniel, and welcome everyone. Internet freedom has been on decline for 6 consecutive years, and this past year has unfortunately continued the trend. What our study has found is that whopping 67% of all internet users live in countries where criticism of the authorities, of the military, or of the ruling elite is censored online. I mean, think about it. 67% live in countries where censorship is so pervasive. Our report points to 4 key reasons for the decline in internet freedom over the past year. The first reason that we have identified is a dramatic increase in blocking and disruption of social media and communication apps. Over the past few years, we have seen increased censorship of social media apps such as Facebook and Twitter and YouTube. But what's been different over the past year is that governments are increasingly targeting messaging apps, WhatsApp and Viber and so forth. In fact, if you take a look at this screen, when my team actually counted all of the apps and all of the countries that have been disrupted over the past year, actually the most disrupted app was WhatsApp, which is something that has really shifted over the previous year. There has been a number of reasons why we have noticed this difference, and we can talk about them a little bit later, but I will mention the key reason for restricting these apps has been preventing users from disseminating news during periods of unrest or during anti-government protests. We have also seen governments restricting these apps for their encryption features, but also in a number of countries to protect the revenue of national telecoms who have been losing their revenue because people have been turning to messaging apps and Skype and other tools like that, which are typically free to download. The second reason that our report points to is also a very dramatic increase in the number of arrests for social media use. In fact, when we look at the number of countries who arrest social media users, and when we count them, we have seen an increase of 50% since 2013. Facebook users have been most targeted, but that's also in part because Facebook is one of the most utilized social media tools. And then the third reason is that we are noticing more and more topics being restricted in countries around the world. What we had seen for a number of years is that criticism of the government, as I mentioned before, is a key target for censorship. But in more and more countries, particularly over the past year, we have seen content related to LGBTI communities being censored. Also, content related to activism, so online petitions or calls for protests, as well as censorship of images as opposed to spoken word. What you will see on the screen are LGBT emojis that were censored in Indonesia, for example. And it's just silly to me to see what some governments find threatening or morally objectionable. Speaking of criticism of censorship of images, for example, for this image alone, and this is Egyptian President El-Sisi, the poster who actually posted this image received a 3-year sentence in jail for the image itself. Or what you see here, it's a comparison of Turkish president with the Lord of the Rings character. We have also seen multiple arrests and charges for posting and distributing this image. And then the fourth reason why we have seen the decline is that more and more governments are censoring the internet under the pretext of national security. And we have seen this both in democracies as well as in non-democratic countries. As Senator Wyden spoke, in democratic countries, this often has led to reductions in privacy and debates regarding encryption. But the biggest threats actually came from non-democratic countries, which in many cases not only restricted privacy, but they actually used national security laws to imprison users for simply speaking about human rights and democracy. With that said, not all news is bad news, and apart from these restrictions, we have actually seen unprecedented activism over the past year. In fact, since we started measuring internet freedom, we have never seen this much organizing being done online, and over the past year, we have seen some tangible results of that. In fact, in 2/3 of the countries we examined, we actually saw a tangible result coming from online organizing, online petitions, or internet freedom activists. Benga will speak about negative law that was diverted, and it had to do specifically with social media. But we have seen even lives being saved in places like Syria because people were able to use WhatsApp to warn others about impending air raids or about health concerns. So thank you very much. That's it for now.
Well, thank you, Sonia. Certainly a lot to dig into. Let me start with the case of Russia. There's lots to talk about specifically there, but we've seen a dramatic increase in arrests of social media users. Why is that happening now?
It's a good question to ask, because the previous tactic of Russian government was to address companies such as social networks, let's say Vkontakte or Facebook, and make them remove content. But probably it has something to do with the increase of discussions online connected to the conflict in Ukraine, for instance. And also maybe it's easier to threaten people to make them self-censor their content. Because when you see that somebody went to jail for going to church and recording a video with Pokemon Go, you wouldn't post a lot of things. And I don't have exact numbers, but I believe the increase was incredible. So the maximum sentence now is 5 years for so-called extremist activity. It's quite a vague term, so expressing extremism. And the maximum term was sentenced in December. So there is actually a blogger who went to jail for 5 years. And there are some people who were sentenced to 2 years to 1 year or something like that. One of them had, for instance, just 12 friends on Vkontakte. So he was not like affecting lots of people. He just had these 12 friends, and he went to jail for 2 years. So yeah.
Another Russia-specific, big issue in Russia that we're seeing more and more elsewhere is the government requirements that data needs to be stored inside the country.
and then a few days ago, a court ruling against LinkedIn. Do you think that is the Russian government is sort of testing the reaction, or is this step one, and then they'll start to go after other and bigger media internet companies?
Yeah, I think it's a test for them. So they will see how the public will react, how will react LinkedIn itself, and also the companies such as Facebook and Twitter, because Facebook and Twitter, they haven't said anything about this law. They neither confirmed nor denied that they will comply with it. So nothing is clear about them. And LinkedIn is the platform which is quite popular in Russia, so it has something like 5 million users, and it is also niche, so it's just for business. And people are not likely to go on streets and protest. They will just install VPN and use it. So it's not risky to start from LinkedIn instead of Facebook or Twitter for them. So, and for now, the social network is still available in Russia. I asked people on Facebook if they have access to it. So LinkedIn is still available in the country. And also on Friday, the regulator, Roskomnadzor, who is responsible for enforcing this law, stated that they received email from LinkedIn that they will schedule another meeting. So there will be some kind of meeting between LinkedIn and this regulator, and we will see how the situation will unfold. Because actually, legally, the regulator can block LinkedIn today. So, but they wait for something else.
And presumably, they would expect a very big and strong reaction if they, not just, if they go after other social media networks.
If they go after Facebook or Twitter, which are really big and popular in Russia, there will be huge reaction, outrage. And maybe also they can show with this case of LinkedIn that they're actually serious about implementing this law to Facebook and Twitter. So probably they will also try to do something about this law instead of being silent.
Right. I'd like to move on to the topic of encryption, and I'm glad Senator Wyden stressed that, because there's Yarovaya's law in Russia, which let's say is an attack on encryption. We have the new cyber law in China, which is vague but is likely providing some legal basis for the government to insist on backdoors into communications tools. Do you think these efforts are going to be successful? I mean, can governments basically force companies to build in backdoors, or is the technology here to stay and users are going to demand it no matter what?
I think that the technology is moving very quickly, and hopefully very quickly ahead of these government efforts. I told one of my law enforcement friends that it feels like they're standing in front of the wave and holding their hands up as the water rushes over them. I think certainly in the internet technical community, there is an enormous push to build and develop trusted technologies at every layer of the stack to ensure that the communication from one end of the communication to the other end is encrypted and secure from end to end. This does not just happen with the flip of a switch. This is technical development that's happening in the engineering community today because the internet developers want people ultimately to trust this technology. It's important that people understand that they can communicate privately, that they have confidence that they can do that in confidentiality, that they know who they're communicating with, that they can authenticate the other party to a communication, that they know that the information that they're sending hasn't been tampered with in the communication itself. And that, as Senator Wyden said, that the information they're searching for, that the data that they store, the data that is collected about them is secure in whatever that transaction is. And at every step of that process, there is technology that has to be implemented to develop that encryption and to make it widely available. There's still quite a long way to go to make it user-friendly. So for anybody who's tried to really implement this in your own communication, we need to make it easier so that it can be more widely deployed. But I can say this is something the Internet technical community, whether it's in the group that I work in the Internet Engineering Task Force, the W3C that develops the web standards, the IEEE that's working at the link layer. All of these technical groups are working very hard on end-to-end encryption for a whole host of purposes, whether it's human rights communications like we're talking about here, or commercial transactions. Every transaction that you conduct over the internet requires trust, and encryption is a key part of that. It's truly unfortunate, as Senator Wyden said, that countries, whether they're democratic or less democratic, are seeking to instill backdoors. But I think there's been some very strong analysis by leading engineers that it's simply not possible to sort of encrypt. And that if you offer a backdoor to one entity, you've basically opened up that communication to many. And so it's not something that you do half-heartedly, so to speak. That does not mean that governments won't continue to try. We're seeing it all around the world. We're seeing it in this country, but as you said, in Russia and China and elsewhere. So I think this is something that the technical community and this community can really join forces on, because it's essential for ongoing trust in the internet.
Right. Benga, some good news, please. And with colleagues in Nigeria, push back on some bad legislation, specifically the frivolous petitions prohibition bill, and then help push forward a positive bill, the Digital Rights and Freedom Bill, to sort of codify protections for internet freedom. What was the basis of this success? What can we learn from the example in Nigeria?
Okay, I bring good news. It's interesting that we ended up where we did with this bill, because over the last few years we've had an interesting approach by government, and it's just not just in Nigeria, in many countries, where governments already do things that are illegal, that are wrong, but then introduce bills or new laws, proposed laws that can then make up for the things they're doing wrong. And that was the case of this bill in Nigeria. It was supposed to be a frivolous petitions bill, and the idea was that legislators felt there were too many people writing, petitions against them, and they were spending too much time on this. So they wanted everyone who was going to write a petition to go to a judge, give them your name, your home address, your mobile number, and every detail. And this is in a country where the Chief Justice was killed, and no one knows to date who killed him. So you're basically saying, if you want to be a whistleblower, go tell a judge, go on public record, this is where I live in case you want to get me. And I think this got everyone wondering, why on earth would I want to say something is wrong and then give all my information? And what really touched a raw nerve for Nigerians was the fact that there was that part of the bill, but there was also a clause that clearly said, if you say anything on social media that comes and sounds as an insult, now that's where you draw the line, right? Anyone who says anything can be defined as an insult. And you were supposed to get, 7 years in jail and pay 5 million naira, fine and things like that. And everyone knew that this was basically to silence people on social media. Because don't forget, this is a country like many others where people couldn't say anything before now. And then they found this platform, social media, where they could say something. And everybody started speaking. And so what happened was, people were speaking about this on social media, and then we went to court. Which was good, because we went to court and said, well, this is a bill, but then the problem we have with this bill is if it becomes law, everyone will be in trouble, including an average citizen who, for example, sees something going on, maybe a robbery, and reports on social media. Because you're actually supposed, before you report the robbery, you're supposed to go to a judge, get permission, and then report, oh my God, there's a robbery. Come on, who will do that? So so everyone came together, civil society, individuals, even the private sector. And one of the reasons why this happened was because for once we saw that this was a popular bill with certain people. And when a bill is popular with the police, popular with security agencies in Nigeria, then it's not exactly a good bill. So we banded around, and eventually the bill was thrown out because there was no way in the world. At the public hearing, the Chief Justice of the Federation, surprisingly, sent a representative who spoke in favor of the law. This is a bill. It's not even law yet, and the Chief Justice is making this kind of statement. And I think that was really good, because we went out and said, wait, if the Chief Justice is partial already, then we're in trouble. And I think that was really helpful, because we're able to paint a picture of how this could be terrible. And guess what? Good news. May 17, we got the announcement, the bill was thrown out, but it didn't even end there. It's the fact that around the same period, we got tired of saying no to everything. Government bought surveillance equipment, no. Government is going to clamp down on social media, no. And the question was, if we say no to everything, what are we saying yes to? And so a few of us came together and drafted what could, I mean, we had inspiration from the Marco Civil in Brazil and said, what do we want to see digital rights, in Nigeria look like? And drafted the bill, and fortunately around the same period, the bill went through first reading, and in June it went through second reading, surprisingly, because at the same time when legislators were saying clamp down, the same legislators passed a positive rights bill. And I think that was really good because, well, initially we thought maybe they didn't know what they were reading, but they did. But what we were able to convince them is that, and we were lucky, by the way, elections happened last year, and the political party that was in power lost the elections. And so what we had been telling them forever, to say that the laws you make right now that are bad laws will work against you when you lose your elections, they kind of didn't take it seriously because they didn't think they were going to lose the elections. So it was a good thing. They lost the elections and then realized, oh my God, we could be the victims of our own bad laws. And that was very helpful. So I think one of the key reasons, yes, there was citizen mobilization. Yes, there was the fact that civil society acted. But the fact that the legislators came face to face with the reality of the evil in the words they were about to pass as law was also something that helped, with the messaging. And that was good news. I wish it was all good news, but I'll stop at the good news for now.
I know. We'll come back to more bad news, but while we're in a optimistic interlude, let's say, I did want to ask Daria about the I Am Not Afraid to Speak campaign, which I gather is another inspiring example of online activism.
Yeah, there was a campaign which started actually in Ukraine from a journalist, a female who shared her experience about harassment and abuse. And it started, it went across social media in Ukraine and Russia with hashtag I'm not afraid to say. So basically women were sharing their experience of abuse and everything, and it was a way to bring a taboo topic into public discussion, because by default it's not always considered very bad in Russia. I mean, sometimes women are blamed for inviting this kind of harassment. So, and this is a great example showing that despite all pressure, progress is inevitable and people fight for their rights.
I think we'll be, for those of you who have questions, we'll be collecting them on note cards, and folks will pass those around. I want to pose a couple more questions before we get to the audience. First, Sally, looking at the big picture and where this is all headed, and I know the Internet Society is doing a big study on the future of the Internet. Do you see these the bad trends continuing, more restrictions, more fracturing, or is there sort of positive trends that we're overlooking at the moment?
Thanks. Yeah, the Internet Society this last year has embarked on a project looking at the forces of change that will impact the Internet over the next 5 to 10 years. We've been doing interviews across our global community, over 1,000 responses to our survey, 115 direct interviews. And the trends are actually very much in line with what we're hearing out of or seeing out of your report. So I think there's some interesting corroborating evidence here. And the concerns are very real that our community is identifying. The idea that the Internet of Things is going to be used by governments as tools of surveillance. That the use of the Internet for propaganda purposes, as governments become more and more comfortable with the Internet as a tool, using it to manipulate public opinion. Certainly something we've been seeing for a long time, but is on the rise, is government intervention and intrusiveness and regulation of the Internet for domestic power purposes. But also to enrich national telecom operators or traditional carriers. And there's an interesting symbiotic relationship that your report picks up as well, and we're hearing that. At the same time, the community, and not unlike what we just heard, sees the growth of the Internet as a tool of transparency, that there's an opportunity for citizens to hold their governments accountable. social media as a tool for organizing. And so we're seeing these two kind of, or these sets of trends in tension. And I think for us, one of the conclusions that we're reaching is that nothing is a foregone conclusion here. But we have to stay very, very vigilant. We cannot take this for granted. I think in countries like the United States, we have a tendency to do that, and the internet is almost becoming the way of electricity. We expect to turn it on and it will always be on. And we absolutely can't do that. It is under pressure, it is under threat. And the work we're doing on the future of the internet shows that. The work in this report certainly bears that out today. There's huge pressure to change the underlying fabric of the internet as a network of networks that doesn't rely or depend on national borders into one that is country by country specific. Let's go back 20, 30 years to the age of the telephone, where it is national borders and governments determine how traffic moves and where it goes and what's in it. So these pressures are very real. I don't think we're at the point yet where we can say it's a foregone conclusion, but let's hope that we don't get there.
And well, if you add up the growing requirements to keep data in country, censorship, pressure for backdoors, etc. I mean, how far down this road do you think we are already?
I think there's a lot of disturbing evidence, a lot of disturbing asks by governments. Whether those things can be implemented, this is where sometimes the technology can be your friend. It's quite difficult given the routing table of the internet, very technical apparatus, but it's very difficult to implement some of these kinds of rules and have traffic continue to move in an efficient manner. Hopefully the technology will, as we say in the internet, route around some of these restrictions. We've seen it happen before, but I would say it's getting harder and harder because I think governments are getting more and more sophisticated in what they're trying to do and understanding the technology and understanding the levers that they have at their disposal in a way that they didn't before. So examples like Nigeria, where we're hearing that the community said this is the kind of digital environment we want, is incredibly encouraging. That's what we should hope countries and citizens are doing around the world to try to codify the internet experience that they expect, rather than sitting back and waiting for the restrictions to encroach upon them.
Right. I don't know, Daria or Bengad, if you have thoughts on where you see the trends going in your country or more broadly.
I think it's a mixed bag for Nigeria and a lot of other African countries. I was saying earlier today that many governments across the continent disregarded the internet as the children thing. I mean, those young people who are just tweeting, clicktivists, they're not going to get on the streets and things like that. But over the last 3 years, that changed. Yeah. The same young people who you thought would stay in their rooms tweeting were tweeting on the streets and broadcasting the protests. And so it became a lot more obvious to governments that, wait a second, this internet thing is not just a children, young people thing. It's for real. We've seen trends in elections changing. In Nigeria, 2015, I mean, maybe not everything, but much of the change that happened in that election was driven by young people getting more information online and sharing that information. So I think, unfortunately, while citizens and organizations mobilize a lot more, we've just gone to court to challenge another law, the cybercrime law in Nigeria. There are 2 sections that are quite interesting, to use that word, interesting. But as citizens continue to do that, we'll have a lot more questions in government about how do we get back control. And it's ironic. These are the same governments that are investing in infrastructure to increase access. And now they're saying that, well, we're improving internet access. As we improve internet access, we get into more trouble. In fact, I tell government officials in Nigeria and anywhere else on the continent that, listen, you're complaining right now that citizens are making noise. You haven't seen anything yet. Internet penetration is at 50%, you're complaining. Wait until it gets to 70, 80%, then you won't even want to be in government. And I think that there's a likelihood that governments, and it's not just a likelihood, we've seen it. We've seen it in proposed laws and in government pronouncements. Cameroon, on Saturday, Friday into Saturday, the deputy leader of the National Assembly called social media users terrorists.
All of them.
Well,
Most of them.
and the reason is because this guy never expected that, for example, there will be leaks of information of, say, not even leaks, these are public documents, budgets, that citizens would take the budget, analyze the budget, and say to governments, wait a second, you did this in 2014, 2015, 2016, you can't do this anymore. And so the trend we're seeing is many governments want more control. Of course, they're paying people to say the things, trying to manipulate opinion online. And so I think the future is going to be quite interesting. You're going to have a lot more government seeking control, but at the same time, you're going to have a lot more citizens, fighting back. Maybe there'll be a balance of forces. Maybe one side will win over the other, but I just sincerely hope that, control does not win over freedoms.
Mm-hmm. I want to take up some excellent questions from the audience, and as we might have predicted, someone wants to your thoughts on what to expect from a Trump administration in terms of internet policy. So, Sonia, do you want to take that first?
Well, that's a good question. I have to say that I'm worried. In my personal opinion, we have President-elect who has shown disregard for some basic principles of free expression and for the rights of minorities. He has went so far to say that parts of the internet should be shut down in the context of fighting terrorism. So I think there are many reasons to be concerned, and looking at it, I think there are three key issues actually that I see could potentially impact internet freedom in the United States under the Trump presidency. One would be potential declines when it comes to the rights to privacy and increased surveillance. And this would be in the context of national security. I fear that this would not come through policy or through legislation, but it would come through national security orders, which are not transparent. So we as civil society would not be able to keep the executive in check. I fear that in particular, the Muslim Americans will be targeted. And I hope to be proven wrong about this, but I think that's my number one fear. The second fear would be increased harassment of online journalists and commentators. We have seen dozens of journalists and online commentators already being harassed during the presidential campaign. And some of them have received death threats, both the conservative and the liberal commentators. I mean, in fact, in the National Review, a commentator published his story where he published something that was critical. And not only did he receive death threats, but actually he received pictures of his adopted daughter in gas chambers. So this is the type of environment online that we have seen during the campaign. And instead of condemning this, we have seen our president-elect actually making his own remarks on his own Twitter account. And then finally, I think that the third way where I would see impact is potentially eroding support for internet freedom in the administration. I feel that US agencies such as DRL, I mean the State Department, the BBG, part of it is USAID. They do excellent work in promoting internet freedom, and I think it's going to be essential for their work to continue. And I think whether that's going to be a possibility will in part depend on who is appointed as the head of those agencies. And it will also depend on congressional support for their programs. But I think it will be important to understand that protecting internet freedom is not only important for the sake of human rights, but it's really important to protect for the benefit of the economy and for the benefit of commerce. So I really hope that that we don't see erosion in that extent.
Sally, what do you think? What do you expect?
I think I had to do a little reading up on this for a panel last week. It's a little difficult. President-elect Trump was not terribly clear on all of his tech policies, didn't have as robust an agenda So a couple things that I think we can discern. Certainly he has been clear about his opposition to network neutrality. We heard that from the senator as well. So I think we can expect to see a pushback against the Obama administration's moves on that front. On cybersecurity has, I think, put out a fairly strong position on offensive cyber capabilities, deterrence, and some sort of review team on military law enforcement and the private sector for domestic cyber security work. So that's a very interesting and I think pretty forceful position, I think we could say. On trade, obviously has a very populist trade message. I think what's unclear at this stage is the extent to which that extends to cross-border data flows. And digital trade. We've seen clearly it extends to things like NAFTA and TPP, but not clear how far down into technology that will go. But obviously for a global internet that depends on the movement of data around the world and the ability to communicate freely, that is something we're going to be looking at very, very clearly. And then I do think the internet policy, at least internationally, is going to be tied very closely to President-elect Trump's foreign policy. So how does he approach things like nation-state negotiations through the UN, where we're seeing a significant rise in member state negotiations over things like cybersecurity, cyber-terrorism? What's the role of government going to be in this administration? So there's, I think, a lot of unknowns at this stage, and the few knowns are perhaps a bit concerning.
Right. I'd like to take up a couple other questions from the audience. A lot of the analysis is about what governments are doing to users, including through messaging apps and social media services. What about the social media companies themselves? Any comments on how well they are doing or not doing in defending the rights of users?
I mean, something has to be said about the fact that, let's face it, data owners, not data owners actually, we own our data, in quotes, 1.7 billion people. That's larger than any country in the world. Things won't go perfect. Things, could go wrong, could go right. One of the good things that we've seen is the increase in interest in transparency. You can look at the transparency reports by Google, by Facebook, by Twitter, and you can see in my country, in your country, who is making requests and all of that. And I think that something Sonia said about the fact that this is no longer about human rights. This is also about business. We've seen internet shutdowns, at least 50 in 2016 alone. And in countries like Uganda or like Bahrain, we've actually seen some calculations. And you've seen, we saw a recent report, showing how much was lost in terms of, during the shutdown periods, how much was lost to the economy. So I think that private sector, companies are also becoming increasingly aware of the fact that human rights is kind of good for business. So I think that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm. There's a question about, can you comment on trends of state-sponsored trolling to quiet dissent? And maybe, Daria, I'd sort of broaden the question about the Russian government's use of disinformation and, let's say, taking advantage of open spaces online to either attack critics of the government and or present wild theories as fact and so on, basically disinformation. What is your sense of the impact of that and how much effect it has?
It's very hard to measure because we don't have really a transparent system of opinion polls, so it's hard to see, do people believe that or not. But I know that the system is really strong in Russia, so they have so-called troll factory in St. Petersburg, for instance. So there are basically people sitting there day and night and just posting these comments for really a small salary, but they still do it. And they also use these trolls to add comments under articles on Forbes and The Guardian, critical of Kremlin and everything. So this tactic tactics was in use for years, and it especially intensified during the acute phase of Ukrainian conflict, and it's still in use. It's very hard to measure how influential they are, but if you talk to, I don't know, to people in Russia, you can see that quite a lot of them do support Putin, and there are some opinion polls saying that this support is growing from year to year, so potentially this is quite influential, but not especially on social media. The thing is that Russians watch TV much more than they follow social networks, and television is all controlled by the state, and this impact is huge, I believe, especially in the regions, not in the capital and St. Petersburg, but somewhere in the villages. People just watch television and follow what they are said.
Right. We have to wrap up in another minute or two, but I just wanted to go around and ask each of you if you have any final comments, points you want to raise.
Certainly, from the Internet Society's perspective, first I want to say how delighted we are to be part of the launch and to support the work that you do. It's incredibly important. We are not human rights experts at the Internet Society, but we truly hope that we are contributing to an Internet that enables free expression, that enables people to communicate and build communities around the world. That's what we believe in. And it's distressing that the trend lines are not as positive as we had hoped. But the work is incredibly important, shining a light on it, putting data around it. I think as Ross said earlier, this is really one of the best reports out there, so we couldn't be happier to be a part of it. And really just want to congratulate you on the work. And if I could leave everybody with one thing here in this room, I think as my other two co-panelists would say, we cannot take this medium for granted. It is growing, it's changing, but we have to continue to be vigilant and defend the values and the principles that brought it about, the freedom to communicate, the fact that data crosses borders, that we can trust it, that it's secure. These are things that are incredibly valuable. And we have to, I think as the data in this report shows, we have to be very vigilant about preserving that.
Daria.
I'd like also to thank the audience and everybody on the panel for participating in it. And unfortunately, I see that Russia is in line with general development of things. So the government is trying to keep data in the country and also decode encrypted messages and everything like that. But still, digital activists, they try to push back in Russia as well as in all the countries across the globe. And I hope that positive forces will win in the end. And thanks, everybody, for listening.
Well, they say eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. And I think that, unfortunately, I wish it wasn't so, but liberty is under attack. And what we've seen in Nigeria and a few other countries is the citizens, when we come together with organizations who have interest in defending rights, things can happen. It could be major, like defeating a bad law. It could be great, like defining what digital rights could be like. It could be just changing or influencing public opinion, with news and with information and with facts. But I think that we've got our work cut out for us. Things are changing across the world. I mean, I'm sure everyone has said 2016 has been an interesting year, from Brexit to the US elections to everything. But it's not just, it doesn't stop there. It's the fact that definitions are changing and things are happening, and we have to keep our eyes on freedom and defend freedom, not just for the sake of rights, but the sake of human sanity.
Sonia, final thoughts?
I would just say that although I came with a quite negative story today, I was incredibly encouraged by the number of success stories that we were able to track in our report this year. So I just wanted to highlight the importance of supporting activists on the ground, activists such as Benga, investigative reporters such as Daria, because I feel like that we are at a critical moment where it seems like that their work is really making a lot of difference. So for that reason, I hope that next year when we gather here, that I'm actually going to have more positive things to deliver to you. So thank you very much. And I would like to also thank my team here in the audience, Adrian, Jessica, Rose, and also Madeline in the UK.
Yes,
Thank you.
and thank all of you for your thoughts this afternoon, and more importantly, for all the work you do day in, day out. And thank you all for coming.